Hi everyone, thank you all for joining the Basic Google Analytics workshop. To go over the agenda for today's workshop, we are first going to give a short description as to what Google Analytics is. Then we'll do some review by first reviewing some vocab and common terms that you'll see throughout this workshop as well as when you're using Google Analytics. Then we'll get into a little bit of a review about the different dashboards and reports available to you all on Google Analytics. Then we'll talk about some insights you can make with the data from Google Analytics, and I'll walk you through an activity where I explain how to create a goal for your site. We'll then go ahead and wrap up the workshop by reviewing some key points we hope you all remember. Of course, if you have any questions about the content covered in this workshop, feel free to email us at webservices@georgetown.edu. So what even is Google Analytics? Well, to put it simply, Google Analytics is a web analytics tool that tracks and reports website traffic. There's a whole bunch of things you can do with Google Analytics, but to highlight a few things, Google Analytics can help provide insights into interactions that are happening real time on your site, some characteristics about your users, the different traffic sources your users are coming from, user behavior on your site, as well as conversion rates once you set up goals on your site. And if you do need access to Google Analytics for a certain site, all you need to do is email Web Services with the name of the site you want to gain access to, and we can go ahead and sort that out for you. And just a note on Google Analytics, while it is an awesome tool to have under your belt and can definitely aid in decision making, it's important to not solely rely on Google Analytics for information on things like user behavior or user characteristics. As we talked about in previous workshops, there's no better way to get to know your users than to interact with them directly, especially if there's something like a user interview. With that being said, Google Analytics is definitely a great resource that can really help you out by presenting you with quantitative data, which is oftentimes something that people look for when trying to justify making a change. So now I want to review some common terms and vocabulary that you might be seeing referenced throughout this workshop, as well as when you're working in Google Analytics. So starting off with metrics. This is definitely a common term, and it refers to the quantitative measurements of data related to a specific dimension. So to give a few examples of different types of metrics that you'll see in Google Analytics, the first one being sessions. And a session in Google Analytics is a period of time when a user is actively engaged with your site. And by default, this is set to 30 minutes, but you can go ahead and adjust this to either a shorter or longer amount of time, depending on your website needs. To go over the next metric, which is page views, this one's pretty self-explanatory. It's the number of views a page has. So when a page is loaded by a user, that will count as one page view. The next term we have is a bounce rate, and this is oftentimes confused with exit rates. And so a bounce rate refers to the percentage of users who left your site after viewing a single page and taking no action. On the other hand, an exit rate refers to the number of exits on a page. And an exit will be counted for a page if that is the last page a user was on before leaving the site. So for an example of an exit, if a user lands on page A, navigates to page B, and then leaves the site, that'll count as an exit for page B. Moving on now to dimension. A dimension is a label or an attribute used to describe data. And to give an example of a dimension in Google Analytics, you can look to mediums. And mediums are the mechanism that delivered your users to your site. This can be something like an organic search or a web referral. And there's also things called secondary dimensions. And these are going to give more information on the primary dimension. So for a medium, a secondary dimension would be a source. So for example, if the medium was an organic search, the source could be something like Google. If the medium was a referral, the source could be something like Facebook. Another term I wanted to bring attention to on Google Analytics is the landing page. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the concept of landing pages for Georgetown sites. And for GU WordPress sites, we have the option to use a landing page template. And while landing pages are typically where we expect our users to land, this might not always be the case. In Google Analytics, a landing page refers to the first page users arrive on at your site, regardless of whether or not this page is using the landing page template. So just a little difference to point out there. Moving on now to the different dashboards and reports that you'll see in Google Analytics. The first one being real-time, and this section is pretty self-explanatory. Here you'll be able to see how your users are interacting with your site in real time. So it's actually a pretty cool report. You can see how many users are currently on your site, what countries they're in, what pages they're on, and a bunch of other metrics. Next one you'll see is audience. And the information that you'll find under the audience report is going to help you better understand the characteristics of your users. So here you'll see information on the active users that were on your site for a certain time period, demographic information on your users, where users are located, some user behavior as in are they new or returning users, as well as the technology that they're using to access your site. In the acquisition report, you'll be able to see information on the different traffic sources your users are using. So this is going to be stuff like mediums and sources and referrals. Next is the behavior report. And this is going to give you information on what your users are doing on your site. So this is going to give information on things like your site content. So you'll have the sections like all pages, content drill down, as well as information on landing and exit pages. The last report that we're going to talk about is the conversion report. And this is going to give you information on goals that you set in Google Analytics. So if you go to this report and you don't see anything there, there's nothing wrong with Google Analytics. It just means that you haven't set up goals for your site yet. Once you do set up these goals, you'll be able to see information on this report. So moving on now to common insights. And in this section, we're going to talk a little bit about how to interpret the data on Google Analytics, as well as suggest some action that you can take with the information that you're learning. So we're going to cover topics like page views, exit rates and bounce rates, as well as setting goals. And so the first insight that we're going to talk about is about page views. And so oftentimes we might have a question, which are my most visited pages? Which are more popular pages on the site? And so to find this information, you're going to go to the behavior report, site content, and then all pages. It's going to list the pages on your site in the order of most page views to least page views. Once you're here, you might find that you want to sort by unique page views instead of page views. And so to point out the difference between page views and unique page views, unique page views are page views that are generated by the same user during the same session. So for example, if a user is on page A, navigates to page B, and back to page A, this will count as one unique page view for page A for that user. Whereas if we were talking about page views, it would count as 2 page views for page A. And so if you do decide that you want to sort by unique page views instead of page views, all you have to do is click on this gray space over here on unique page views, and it will sort it by most unique page views to least unique page views. And if you want to sort from descending to ascending, go ahead and click on the gray space again, and it will do that for you. And so now you know which ones are your most popular pages and which ones maybe have the least amount of page views on your site. So what can you do with this information? And so going off on pages that maybe don't have as many page views as you would hope, there's a number of reasons why this might be happening. And so consider the following factors. Is the content on that page relevant and useful to your users? So this goes back to the understanding your users workshop and understanding your users' needs. Think about what your users' needs are. Is the content on that page going to satisfy one of your users' needs? If it doesn't, this might be the reason why this page isn't garnering so many views. Another thing to consider is the page easily accessible? Where is it located on your site? This goes back to the information architecture and site navigation workshop. Think about how you're structuring your site and where you're putting these pages, and think about how your users are going to be navigating your site. You might find that the content on this page is relevant and useful to your users, but maybe it's not in the best location for your users to find. And so if you do find that the content on this page is relevant and useful to your users, and it is located in a good spot on your site, but maybe it still doesn't have as many page views as you would like it to, this is where you can use your higher traffic pages to your advantage and link to information you want to highlight. There's a couple of different ways that you can do this. If you want to bring attention to a post, you can use a newsfeed. If you want to highlight some upcoming events, you might consider using the events block. You can use call to actions to encourage action or to view a certain page. Card decks are a great way to add an appealing visual element, and you can link to different pages that way. There's also callouts that you can use either in the ruled or solid style to highlight important information in pages. So another question that people might want to find the answer to in Google Analytics is, where are users leaving my site? So oftentimes we want our users to keep viewing our content as much as possible. We want to know where exactly they're leaving our site. And this is going to relate to exit pages. And like we talked about earlier, an exit page is going to be the last page a user is on before either the session ends or before they leave your site. And so to find out what your exit pages are, you're first going to go to Behavior, Site Content, and then Exit Pages. Here it's going to list your pages by the highest number of exits to the lowest number of exits. And it'll also give you information like page views and exit rate. So now that you know which pages have the highest amount of exits and which pages have the least amount of exits, what can you do with this information? Well, it's important to evaluate exit pages on a case-by-case basis. We might automatically think that a high number of exits for a certain page is bad, but it's not always a good or a bad thing. A large number of exits can mean that the page did not have the information that the user was looking for. If this is the case, think back to your audience's needs and what kind of content they are looking for. You might find that there's a disconnect between the content on that page and your user's needs. Another reason that a page might have a large number of exits could be because the user found exactly the information they were looking for. So for example, a user might go to your site looking for information on an application deadline. They'll navigate your site, find a page that has that information, and then they'll leave the site. And this isn't a bad thing. The user found exactly the information they were looking for, and that's the reason why they left their site, because their need was satisfied. So again, it's important to evaluate these pages on a case-by-case basis. And if you do find that there is a page that does have a high number of exits, and maybe this isn't the last page that you want your users to be on, but then this isn't the last page on your user's journey, then think about ways to encourage your users to stay on your site and possibly view other pages on your site, so you can keep them going through that user journey. So a couple ways to do this is to either add a link to another page, a news feed, or card decks to highlight similar information. And just to note when you're doing this is to make sure that the information that you're linking to is relevant to the current page that the user is on. The page that the user is on is about admissions. You might not want to link them to a faculty or staff page because it's not really relevant to the kind of information that the user is looking for in that moment. So for a page that you are okay with being the exit page, consider adding a call to action for your users before they leave the site. And this can look something like signing up for an informational newsletter or downloading an application form. It all depends on what your goals are for your website and what you want your users to accomplish when on your site. So now we're going to move on to bounce rates. And you can find the bounce rate in a few different places. You can find the overall bounce rate for your site in the audience report by going to Audience and Overview. To find the bounce rate for a specific source or medium, you can go to Acquisition and All Traffic, and then Source Medium. You might want to know what the bounce rate for a source or medium is because it can help you identify a disconnect between the content on your site and where your users are coming from. So for example, say you have a particularly high bounce rate from referrals coming from Facebook. This might mean that there's a disconnect between the content that you're putting on Facebook and the content that your users are expecting to find on your site. So looking at the bounce rates for sources and mediums is a great way to identify these kinds of gaps. If you're looking to find the bounce rate for individual pages, you would go to Behavior, Site Content, and then All Pages. And we've been on the All Pages report before, and so you're going to see the pages. They're typically listed by page views by default. And so to sort it by bounce rate, you're just going to go ahead and click on the gray space on the bounce rate. And that will sort it by the highest bounce rate to the lowest bounce rate. And so similar to exit rate, bounce rate can mean a few different things. It can mean that the quality of the content is low and not engaging. If this is the case, consider adding more call to actions, videos, or links to similar pages so that you can engage your users. A high bounce rate per page can also mean that there's a disconnect between your audience's needs and the page content. If this is the case, you're going to want to think about your users' needs and potentially the source that they're coming from, and really analyze your content. Does it satisfy your users' needs? But a high bounce rate can also mean that the user found exactly the information that they were looking for. So again, as an example, if a user clicks on a page looking for information on how to visit the campus, they find that information without triggering any other actions, and they leave the site. That's going to count as a bounce. And this isn't a bad thing because the user's need was satisfied and they got exactly what they were looking for. So it is important to look at each page on a case-by-case basis and think about what the purpose of that page is. So if the purpose of that page is to be more informational, then a higher bounce rate is to be expected. On the other hand, if a page is meant to be more engaging, then a high bounce rate for the page is not ideal. And so now let's talk about goals in Google Analytics. And a goal in Google Analytics is going to represent a completed activity or a conversion. And they're a really great way to measure how often users are completing specific actions on your site. And the great thing about goals in Google Analytics is that you can assign a monetary value to each goal so you can see how much that conversion is worth to your department and prioritize the highest value conversions. And so there's 4 different goal types that you can create when you're in Google Analytics. The first one is a destination goal. And you're going to want to create a destination goal when you want to track when a specific location is loaded. So say you're going to publish new content on your site, and this particular bit of content is important, and you want to see if users are actually going to these pages. Here's where you would use a destination goal. Another goal is going to be the duration goal. And you're going to use a duration goal when you want to track if a session lasts a specific amount of time or longer. So for example, if your site has lots of posts that you want to see if your users are actually taking the time to read, you can set a duration goal to track if a user session lasts, say, 15 minutes or longer. Another goal in Google Analytics is the pages/screens per session goal. And you're going to use this goal when you want to track if a user is viewing a specific number of pages or screens in a session. So say you have a site where you want users to be viewing multiple pages. You can set a pages/screens per session goal to track users that are viewing, say, 4 or more pages per session. The last goal that we're going to talk about in Google Analytics is the event goal. And this is kind of a catch-all goal. And it's going to be used when you want to track if an action that is defined in an event has been triggered. And with the events goal, you can track things like if a user is clicking on a certain video, if a user is downloading an application form. You can even track where users are scrolling on your page. So the event goal is pretty useful in Google Analytics, but we're not going to be talking about this specific goal in this workshop. We'll have a future workshop where we cover how to create an event goal. But for the purposes of this workshop, we'll only be covering the first 3 goals. And so I'll demo how to create a goal and what this would look like in Google Analytics, but to just verbally walk you through the steps, the first thing that you're going to do is make sure that you have access to the site's Google Analytics, because else you won't be able to create a goal. Once you know that you have access to Google Analytics, you're going to go to Admin, and then under the View section, you're going to hit Goals. And then you're going to click Create a New Goal. This should be on the upper left-hand corner. And so from here, you're going to select Custom Goal. And once you're there, you're going to choose the goal type. And this is where you would choose between destination, duration, pages/screens per session, and events. So once you select what kind of goal type you want, you're then going to fill out the appropriate information for that goal type. So if it was a destination goal, you would fill out the URL. If it was a duration goal, you would fill out the duration of the session that you want to track, and so on and so forth. The 4th step, which is optional, is to assign a goal value. And so once you've successfully created these goals, you'll then be able to view information on these goals and conversions in the conversions report in Google Analytics. And to give an example of the type of information that you'll find in this report, you can find things like the goal flow. And in the goal flow, you'll be able to see things like the path your traffic has traveled through a funnel towards that conversion. You can also see where users are entering, engaging, and exiting your content within that funnel. And to go over some best practices and some things to keep in mind when you're creating goals, starting with best practices, you're going to want to use intuitive names for your goals. This one is pretty self-explanatory. Don't use general or vague names when naming your goals. This can be problematic because if someone else on your team is looking at information on the goals, they might not understand exactly what that goal is tracking. So make sure you're using specific and intuitive names for your goals. Another thing is to assign a goal value. So you might be thinking that assigning a monetary value for your goal isn't necessarily applicable to your website. If this is the case, you can use a consistent numeric scale to weigh and compare your conversions. This can look something like using a scale like 1 through 10. So you would assign goals that have a high value to your organization, a 10 or a 9, maybe goals that are a little less important, a 1 or a 2. Another tip to keep in mind is to keep track of changes that you're making to your goals. This is important because changing a goal will change your conversion data from the point of the change. And so this might lead to confusion in your reports if you haven't made note of when that change was being made. Some things to keep in mind when you're creating goals is that you are only going to be able to create 20 goals per reporting view. So make sure you're creating your goals wisely. Another thing to keep in mind is that goals are going to apply to the data you collect after the goal has been created. So if you set up a goal today, it's not going to track conversions that were made in the past week. It's going to start tracking that information from the moment you create that goal. And also your goal must be set up before the data is going to appear in your conversion report. Another thing to keep in mind is that goals cannot be deleted. So while they can't be deleted, they can be deactivated if you no longer wish to track that goal. Another thing to keep in mind is that goal IDs and goal sets cannot be changed after you create them, but you are able to change the goal name and type if you do want to reuse a specific goal. And so now I want to demo how the process of creating a goal in Google Analytics would look like. And so when you log in, you're going to see something like this. And you are able to customize this dashboard to better fit what information you're looking for on Google Analytics so you can see at a glance when you log in. And so the first thing you're going to want to do is click on Admin. Then once here, you're going to go under View and click on Goals. Then click on New Goal. Then you're going to name your goal. And for the purposes of this example, I'm going to create a destination goal. Specifically, I'm going to want to track if users are visiting our content strategy page on our documentation site. So I'm going to name this goal Content Strategy Page. Like I said, I'm going to create a destination goal. So I'm going to hit Destination, then Continue. Here is where I'm going to add the page that I want to track. I'm going to go ahead and copy this URL over. When you're adding these URLs, you're only going to want to include everything after the domain, so after .georgetown.edu. Then I'm going to change this from equals to regular expression. And what this means is that it's going to track any page that contains this. Since I have this done, my next step would then be to add a value if I wanted to. If I wanted to add the value, I would add that here. One cool thing that you can do with the destination goal is to add a funnel. And so you're going to want to use the funnel if you have a certain path that you expect your users to follow when on your site. So for example, say I want to track if users are going to the Understanding Our Users page instead of the Content Strategy page. So if that's the case, I'm going to update my goal URL. And I'm going to think about the path that I want my users to take to get to this page. So first, ideally, I would want my users to start on the Content Strategy page. I'm going to go ahead and copy that URL over here and name this one Content Strategy. And the next step I would want my users to take would be to view the Defining Website Goals page. Then my last step that I would add in the funnel would be the page that I am trying to track, which is the Understanding Our Users page. Once I've filled out all the information, I'm then going to hit Save, and that will create the goal. And so to give examples of how creating the other goal types would look like, I'll go ahead and review each goal type, starting with duration. And so if I wanted to use a duration goal to track if user sessions are lasting longer than 15 minutes, all I would do is add 15 in the minutes. Then I can again add my goal value if I choose to, and then hit Save. To the page of screens per session goal, say I want to track if users are visiting more than 4 pages per screens per session. All I would do is enter 4 here. Google Analytics would track if users are viewing more than 4 pages per session. Again, I can add my goal value if I wanted to, and then I would hit Save. Now I want you all to take the chance to practice creating a goal in Google Analytics. I want you to choose between the first three different goal types: destination, duration, and pages/screens per session. Think about the different goal types, what they do, and decide which goal would be most useful to your website's goal. Then create that goal. Feel free to discuss with your team members what goal would better fit your organization's needs. If you don't feel comfortable making a goal right now, take the time to think about and discuss with your team some more. If you have any questions on any goals that you want to create for your website, feel free to email us at Web.Services@Georgetown.edu. Hopefully you all were able to create a goal for your website, and if not, hopefully you at least started to think about what kind of goals you can create for your website. And so now I want to wrap up this workshop by doing a quick review and highlighting some of the information that we talked about today. So if you remember, we gave a definition as to what Google Analytics is, and it's a web analytics tool that's going to help track and report website traffic. It can help you better understand user interactions on your site, your users' behavior, and it can also help you measure your conversion rate for the goals that you're setting. We talked about the different dashboards and reports you can see, like real time, which is going to give you information on real-time interactions on your site, audience report, which is going to give you information on user characteristics, acquisitions report, which is going to give you information on the different traffic sources your users are coming from, behavior, which is going to help you understand what your users are doing on your site, as well as the conversions reports, which is going to give you information on those goals that you have created. We also reviewed some different vocab terms like page views. We talked about the difference between page views and unique page views. We also talked about exit pages, which again is the last page that a user is on before ending the session or leaving the site, and bounce rates, which is the percentage of users who land on a page and leave without triggering any action. And then we most recently talked about goals and the 4 different goal types, which was destination, duration, pages/screens per session, and event goals. And so hopefully you all understand Google Analytics a little bit more and have some ideas about the different actions you can take with some of the information that you're learning in Google Analytics. If you have any questions about any of the content that we covered in this workshop today, please feel free to email us at webservices@georgetown.edu. Like we mentioned earlier, we are going to be having more workshops on Google Analytics that are going to cover more advanced topics like creating event goals. So if you're interested in that, make sure you're looking out for our monthly newsletters on the Catch. With that being said, thank you all for listening to this workshop, and I hope you enjoy exploring Google Analytics.